The frozen wind cut through Helena Daniels like 1,000 knives as she stumbled through the whiteout, her lungs burning with each gasping breath she dragged into her chest. Behind her, somewhere in the swirling wall of snow that had descended upon the Texas panhandle with vicious suddenness, her uncle's voice still echoed in her memory, cold and venomous as he'd cornered her in the ranch house parlor just hours before. She'd run then, grabbing nothing but her heavy wool coat and the small revolver her father had given her before he died. And now the January blizzard of 1885 threatened to claim her life just as surely as Uncle Morris would if he caught her. Her boots sank deep into drifts that seemed determined to swallow her whole, and the temperature had dropped so low that her eyelashes froze together every time she blinked, forcing her to claw at them with numb fingers just to see the path ahead. She'd been fleeing for what felt like hours, though time had lost all meaning in the white chaos that surrounded her. The landscape offered no landmarks, no sense of direction, only endless white punctuated by the occasional dark skeleton of a bare tree. Her uncle wanted her inheritance, the substantial fortune her father had left her when consumption took him 6 months ago, and Morris had made it clear that marriage to his business associate, a cruel man twice her age, was the only future he'd permit. When Helena refused, when she'd seen the documents he'd forged to claim her father's estate as his own, everything had changed. The look in his eyes had turned from calculated greed to murderous intent, and she'd known with perfect clarity that he would not let her live to contest his claims. The wind shifted suddenly, and through a brief gap in the curtain of snow, Helena spotted a structure ahead. Hope surged through her exhausted body as she forced herself forward, her legs trembling with the effort. It was a cabin, small but solid, with smoke rising from a stone chimney. She nearly wept with relief as she half ran, half crawled toward it, collapsing against the wooden door and pounding with fists that had lost all feeling. The door opened so quickly she almost fell inside, but strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. A man's voice, deep and concerned, cut through the howling wind. "Good God, get in here before you freeze to death." Helena stumbled across the threshold and the door slammed shut behind her, cutting off the brutal cold. She stood shaking violently in the sudden warmth, ice crystals falling from her coat to puddle on the rough wooden floor. Slowly, she raised her eyes to look at her rescuer. He was tall, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered from years of outdoor work, strong-jawed and handsome in a rugged way that made her heart skip despite her terror. He wore simple ranch clothes, a wool shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and he studied her with an intensity that was both assessing and kind. "You are half frozen," he said, already moving toward the fireplace where flames crackled cheerfully. "Come here, sit down before you collapse." Helena wanted to speak, to explain, to warn him, but her teeth chattered so hard she could barely form words. He guided her to a chair near the fire and wrapped a thick blanket around her shoulders before kneeling to pull off her ice-crusted boots. The gesture was so gentle, so unexpected that tears sprang to her eyes. "My name is Aaron Ives," he said as he worked, setting her boots aside and chafing her frozen feet carefully between his warm hands. "This is my winter line camp. I work for the Double R Ranch, checking on cattle during the cold months. What in heaven's name are you doing out in this storm?" "Running," Helena managed through chattering teeth. "My uncle. He's going to kill me." Aaron's hands stilled on her feet and his gray eyes snapped up to meet hers. Something hardened in his expression, a protective fierceness that transformed his face. "Tell me." So she did. The words tumbled out in a rush as sensation slowly returned to her extremities, bringing with it sharp pins and needles of pain. She told him about her father's death, about the inheritance that should have been hers, about Morris Daniels and his schemes. She explained about the forged documents, the forced marriage arrangement, and the terrible moment when she'd realized her uncle intended to see her dead rather than risk her interference. "I found letters," she said, her voice steadier now as warmth seeped back into her body. "Hidden in his study. Communications with a man named Garrett, discussing how to make my death look like an accident. I confronted him, and he did not even bother to deny it. He told me I had two choices: marry the man he'd chosen and sign over everything, or die. So I ran." Aaron listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, he stood and moved to the window, peering out through the frost-covered glass at the raging blizzard beyond. "How far behind you is he?" Aaron asked. "I do not know. The storm was already starting when I left the house. I thought perhaps it would cover my tracks, make it impossible for him to follow, but I became lost. I have been walking for hours." Aaron turned from the window, and the look on his face made Helena's breath catch. He was angry, she realized, furiously angry on her behalf, and the righteous fury in his eyes made something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. "You are safe here," he said firmly. "I give you my word. Whatever happens, I will not let him hurt you." Before Helena could respond, the sound of hoofbeats penetrated the cabin walls, audible even over the howling wind. Her blood turned to ice in her veins. "That is him. It must be." Aaron moved with swift efficiency, his hand finding her shoulder and squeezing once, reassuringly. "Listen to me carefully. There is a root cellar beneath the trapdoor under that rug by the bed. Get down there now and do not make a sound, no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" Helena nodded, already moving. She threw back the braided rug to reveal a wooden trapdoor set into the floor, pulling it open to reveal a ladder descending into darkness. The space below smelled of earth and stored potatoes, but she did not hesitate, climbing down quickly. Aaron handed her the blanket and a lit candle before closing the trapdoor above her head. She heard him drag the rug back into place, and then his footsteps moved away. The root cellar was cramped and cold, though nothing like the brutal freeze outside. Helena crouched in the darkness, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain it could be heard through the floorboards above. She clutched the blanket tight around her shoulders and tried to control her breathing as heavy fists pounded on the cabin door. Aaron's boots crossed the floor above her head and she heard the door open. Her uncle's voice, sharp and imperious, cut through the storm's roar. "I am looking for my niece," Morris Daniels announced without preamble. "A girl of 19, dark hair, probably half frozen. She ran away from our ranch this afternoon, and I am worried sick about her welfare in this storm." The concern in his voice would have sounded genuine to anyone who did not know him. Helena's hands clenched into fists. "Have not seen anyone," Aaron replied, his tone flat and unhelpful. "Been here alone all day." "You are certain? She might have passed nearby, might have left tracks you noticed." "Mister, in case you have not looked outside recently, there is a blizzard. Any tracks would be covered in minutes. If your niece is out in this, you had better pray she found shelter somewhere, because otherwise you will be looking for a body come spring thaw." Helena heard her uncle make a sound of frustration. "I need to search this area thoroughly. My niece is not well, you understand. She has been troubled since her father's death, prone to flights of fancy and hysteria. I fear she may harm herself if she is not found quickly." "That's so." Aaron's voice was heavy with skepticism. "Well, you are welcome to look around outside if you want, but I am telling you there is nobody here but me. This cabin is barely big enough for one person, as you can see." There was a pause, and Helena held her breath, imagining her uncle's eyes scanning the small space above her head. The cabin truly was tiny, just one room with a bed, a table, some shelves, and the fireplace. There was nowhere to hide except the root cellar, and if Morris thought to look there, to pull back that rug. "Where is the nearest shelter from here?" Morris asked finally. "Well now, that depends on which direction you head. There is a line camp about 8 miles northeast, over near Copper Creek. Jenkins runs that one. And there is the old Wilson homestead maybe 10 miles due south, though that has been abandoned for years. East will take you back toward Fort Worth eventually, but that is a good 20 miles, and west is nothing but open range for days. 8 miles northeast, you said. That is right. Follow the tree line until you hit the creek, then follow the water north. You cannot miss it." Helena's eyes widened in the darkness. Aaron was deliberately sending her uncle in the wrong direction, away from wherever the real nearby shelters might be. 8 miles in this blizzard, toward a camp that might not even exist. "I appreciate your help," Morris said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "If you do happen to see my niece, there is a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return." "I will keep that in mind," Aaron replied. "You best get moving if you want to reach that camp before dark. This storm is not letting up any time soon." Helena heard the door close, then the fading sound of hoofbeats as her uncle rode away into the white fury of the blizzard. She waited, every muscle tense, until the trap door above her head lifted and Aaron's face appeared, backlit by firelight. "He is gone," Aaron said, reaching down to help her climb out. "I sent him northeast toward nothing. There is no line camp at Copper Creek, no creek by that name anywhere near here. By the time he realizes I lied, he will be miles away, and this storm will have covered any real trail." Helena emerged from the root cellar, her legs shaking as the adrenaline drained from her body. She found herself suddenly dizzy, swaying on her feet, and Aaron caught her elbows, steadying her with gentle hands. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up into his gray eyes. "You did not have to help me. You did not have to lie to him." "Yes, I did," Aaron said simply. "Your uncle is hunting you like an animal, and any decent man would do the same." He paused, still holding her arms, and something in his expression softened. "Besides, I could see the fear in your eyes when we heard those hoofbeats. Whatever he has done to put that kind of terror in you, he does not deserve to find you." They stood close together in the warm cabin, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls, and Helena felt something shift inside her chest. This stranger, this cowboy who owed her nothing, had risked himself to protect her without hesitation. He had looked at her desperation and responded with immediate, unquestioning aid. "I am Helena," she said softly. "Helena Daniels." "Helena," Aaron repeated, and the way he said her name, careful and warm, made her heart skip. "You should sit back down, get warm again. That was too close." He was right. The brief time in the root cellar had chilled her anew, and she sank gratefully into the chair by the fire. Aaron moved to the stove, where a pot of something that smelled like beef stew simmered, and ladled out a generous portion into a tin bowl. "Eat," he said, handing it to her along with a spoon. "You need to get your strength back." Helena accepted the bowl with trembling hands, and the first spoonful of hot stew seemed to restore something vital inside her. She had not realized how hungry she was, how much the fear and cold had taken from her. As she ate, Aaron settled into the other chair, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What will you do?" he asked after a while. "Your uncle will not give up. When he realizes I sent him on a false trail, he will come back." "I know," Helena said quietly. "I have been trying to think. I have an aunt in Kansas City, my mother's sister. She never liked Morris, and she has the means to help me contest his claims. But getting to Kansas City requires money I do not have and a journey I cannot make alone. The storm should blow itself out by morning, Aaron said thoughtfully. When it does, we can ride to Fort Worth. It is about 15 miles from here. There are law offices there, a telegraph station. You could wire your aunt, get help. Will that be enough? Morris has already forged documents. What if he has bought influence with the local law? Aaron's jaw tightened. Then we will find someone who cannot be bought. There are still honest men in this territory, Helena. I promise you that. The conviction in his voice stirred something in her, a fragile hope she had thought extinguished. She finished her stew in silence, and Aaron took the empty bowl, washing it in a basin of water without being asked. The domesticity of the gesture, the easy capability with which he moved through the small space, made her aware of him in a way that was entirely inappropriate given her circumstances. Yet she could not help noticing the breadth of his shoulders, the strength in his hands, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "You can take the bed tonight," Aaron said, interrupting her thoughts. "I will sleep on the floor by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Helena protested. "You have already done so much." "You will take the bed," Aaron said firmly, but there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. "I have slept in far worse places than a warm cabin floor, I promise you. Besides, you have been through an ordeal. You need proper rest." Helena wanted to argue, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves now that the immediate danger had passed. Her body ached, her mind felt foggy, and the thought of lying down seemed impossibly appealing. "Thank you," she said again, the words feeling inadequate for everything he had done. Aaron pulled blankets from a chest and made himself a pallet near the fire while Helena, with burning cheeks, changed out of her damp dress into one of his shirts. It fell to her knees, far too large, and smelled of soap and wood smoke and something distinctly masculine that made her pulse quicken. She climbed into the narrow bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin, and watched as Aaron settled onto his makeshift bed with an ease that spoke of frequent practice. "Aaron," she said into the darkness after he had extinguished the lantern, leaving only the fire's glow to light the room. "Yes. Why did you help me? You do not know me. You could have turned me away, told my uncle the truth. It would have been safer for you." There was a long pause before he answered, and when he did, his voice was quiet but certain. "My sister was 19 when she died. Thrown from a horse, they said, but I always wondered. She had been engaged to a man my father chose, a man she was terrified of. The day before the wedding, she went riding and never came back." He was silent for a moment. "When I saw you at that door, desperate and frozen and running for your life, I saw her. I saw the chance to do for you what I could not do for Sarah. So yes, I had to help you. There was never any question." Tears stung Helena's eyes in the darkness. "I am so sorry about your sister." "So am I," Aaron said softly. "Every day, but maybe some good can come from it if it means you get to live the life she could not." Helena closed her eyes, Aaron's words echoing in her mind. She had expected this day to end in death, either frozen in the snow or at her uncle's hands. Instead, she lay safe and warm, protected by a stranger whose grief had transformed into compassion. Sleep claimed her gradually, and for the first time in months, she felt something that resembled peace. She woke to pale sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and the smell of coffee brewing. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a world transformed into pristine white. Aaron was already up, dressed, and moving around the cabin with quiet efficiency. When he noticed her stirring, he smiled, and the expression lit up his entire face. "Morning. Storm broke just before dawn. The snow is deep, but we can make it to Fort Worth if we leave soon." Helena sat up, acutely aware of how improper it was to be wearing only his shirt, but Aaron politely turned his attention to the coffee pot, giving her privacy to dress. Her clothes had dried overnight by the fire, and she changed quickly, grateful for the warmth they had absorbed. Over a breakfast of biscuits and coffee, they planned their route. Aaron explained that his horse, a sturdy roan named Copper, could carry them both if they traveled slowly. The journey would take most of the day through the snow, but it was manageable. "What about your work?" Helena asked. "Will you not get in trouble for abandoning your post?" Aaron shrugged. "I will explain the circumstances to my boss, Tom Rutherford. He is a good man. He will understand, and if he does not, well, there are other ranches that need winter hands." The casual way he risked his employment for her sake made Helena's chest tighten. "I will pay you back," she said earnestly. "Once I have access to my inheritance, I will make sure you are compensated for everything you are risking." "I do not want your money, Helena," Aaron said, his gray eyes meeting hers across the table. "I want you to be safe. That is payment enough." They set out an hour later with Aaron in the saddle and Helena seated behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. The contact was intimate, necessary, and it made her hyper-aware of every breath he took, every shift of his muscles beneath her hands. The landscape was a winter wonderland, beautiful and treacherous, with drifts that reached the horse's chest in places. As they rode, they talked. Aaron told her about growing up in Oklahoma Territory, about following the cattle drives north until he had saved enough to settle in Texas. He spoke of his dreams of having his own ranch someday, a modest spread where he could raise horses and build something that lasted. Helena found herself sharing her own history, her childhood in Fort Worth as the daughter of a successful merchant, her father's slow decline from consumption, her grief at losing the parent who had always protected and encouraged her. "He wanted me to have choices," she said, her voice catching slightly. "That is why he left everything to me instead of to Morris. He knew my uncle would squander it on gambling and bad investments. Father wanted me to be able to live on my own terms, to marry for love or not marry at all if I chose, and now Morris is trying to steal all of that away." "He will not succeed," Aaron said firmly. "I will not let him." The certainty in his voice wrapped around Helena like a shield. She tightened her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his broad back for just a moment, and felt his hand come up to cover hers where it pressed against his stomach. The gesture was brief, but it sent warmth flooding through her that had nothing to do with the winter sun. They stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat the provisions Aaron had packed. Sitting on a fallen log in a small clearing, surrounded by snow-laden pines, Helena studied the man who had become her protector. In the bright daylight, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight scar on his chin, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work. He was handsome, undeniably, but it was more than that. There was an inherent goodness in him, a steadiness that made her feel anchored when everything else in her world had come unmoored. "Tell me about Fort Worth," she said. "I have not been there in years. My father moved us to the ranch when I was 15, seeking cleaner air for his lungs." "It has grown considerably," Aaron replied, handing her a piece of jerky. "More buildings, more people. The railroad has brought prosperity but also trouble. There are still good folks there, though. Judge Harrison, for one. He has a reputation for honesty that even the worst elements respect." "Will he help us?" "If he hears your story, yes. I am certain of it." They reached the outskirts of Fort Worth as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The town sprawled before them, larger than Helena remembered, with wide streets churned to muddy slush by traffic. Aaron guided Copper through the busy thoroughfares. past saloons and mercantiles and boarding houses, until they reached a substantial brick building with a sign that read, "Harrison and Associates, Attorneys at Law." Inside, a clerk greeted them with professional courtesy that turned to concern when he saw Helena's travel-worn appearance. Aaron did the talking, his tone brooking no argument, and within minutes, they were ushered into the private office of Judge Samuel Harrison himself. The judge was a man in his 60s, with silver hair and keen blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to the truth. He listened without interrupting as Helena laid out her entire story, producing from her coat pocket the letters she had taken from her uncle's study before fleeing. Aaron sat beside her, a silent but solid presence, and occasionally the judge's gaze would flick to him with an expression of approval. When Helena finished, Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "This is a serious matter, Miss Daniels. Your uncle has committed fraud at the very least, and if these letters are genuine, he has conspired to commit murder." "They are genuine," Helena said quietly. "I would stake my life on it." "You may have to," the judge said gravely. "Morris Daniels is not without influence in certain circles. However, your father was a well-respected man in this community, and I knew him personally. He spoke to me about his estate planning, in fact, and I can testify that he explicitly intended for you to inherit everything." He paused, studying her. "Where are you staying?" "You will need secure lodging while we sort this out." Helena's stomach dropped. In all the chaos, she had not thought that far ahead. "I do not know. I suppose a boarding house, but I have no money. My uncle controlled all the household funds." "She can stay with my sister," Aaron said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. "My married sister, I mean. Mary and her husband John run a boarding house on Elm Street. They will give her a room, and I will vouch for payment once Miss Daniels' inheritance is secured." "That would be acceptable," Judge Harrison said with a nod. "And you, Mr. Ives, what is your interest in this matter?" "I found Miss Daniels fleeing for her life through a blizzard," Aaron said simply. "I intend to see her safely through this situation. That is all." The judge's eyes crinkled with something that might have been amusement. "I see. Very well. I will begin proceedings immediately to freeze Morris Daniels' access to the estate and to investigate these allegations. Miss Daniels, you will need to make a formal statement, and we will need to locate any additional evidence that might support your claims. This will take time." "How much time?" Helena asked. "Weeks, possibly months. Your uncle will fight this, and the legal system moves slowly. But with these letters and my testimony regarding your father's intentions, I am confident we will prevail." Relief and anxiety warred within Helena. Weeks or months of living in limbo, always looking over her shoulder, waiting for Morris to make another move. As if sensing her distress, Aaron's hand found hers beneath the edge of the judge's desk, his fingers interlacing with hers and squeezing gently. The contact grounded her, reminded her she was not alone in this fight. They left the judge's office as evening settled over Fort Worth, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Aaron led her through the lamplit streets to a tidy two-story house on Elm Street, where a woman who could only be his sister answered their knock. Mary was perhaps 30, with Aaron's same gray eyes and a warm smile that widened with surprise when she saw her brother. "Aaron, what brings you to town? And who is this?" The explanations took some time, but Mary's initial surprise transformed into fierce protectiveness once she understood Helena's situation. She ushered them inside, insisted Helena take a room on the second floor, and would not hear any talk of payment. "If my brother trusts you, that is good enough for me," Mary said firmly. "Besides, any woman brave enough to run through a blizzard to escape a bad situation deserves help. You stay here as long as you need, Miss Daniels. Please call me Helena." Over dinner, with Mary's husband John and their 2 young children chattering at the table, Helena felt something she had not experienced in months: the warmth of family. Mary and John were kind. Their children were delightful, and Aaron sat across from her looking pleased and relaxed in a way she had not yet seen. This was his family, she realized, these people who welcomed her without hesitation because he had asked them to. After the meal, Aaron walked her to her room, lingering in the hallway with his hat in his hands. "I should head back to the ranch tomorrow," he said reluctantly. "Let Tom know what has happened, make sure my job is still there, but I will come back to town in a few days to check on you." "You have already done so much," Helena said softly. "I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to thank me," Aaron replied. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "I just need to know you are safe. That is all I want." They stood close together in the narrow hallway, and Helena's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. His hand lingered near her face, his thumb brushing her cheek, and his eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her dizzy. "Aaron," she whispered, not quite sure what she meant to say. He seemed to wrestle with himself for a moment, then leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She did not. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and questioning, and Helena felt the world tilt on its axis. Her hands came up to grip his shoulders, and he made a soft sound against her mouth, one arm sliding around her waist to pull her closer. The kiss deepened, became something more urgent, and Helena felt heat bloom through her entire body. This was nothing like the chaste pecks she had received from would-be suitors in her past. This was fire and need and a connection so profound it frightened her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Aaron rested his forehead against hers. "I should not have done that," he said roughly. "You are going through so much, and I do not want to take advantage." "You are not," Helena assured him, her fingers still clutching his shirt. "You are the only good thing in my life right now, Aaron, the only thing that feels right." He kissed her again, softer this time, then forced himself to step back. "Get some rest. I will come back in 3 days. I promise." Helena watched him descend the stairs, then closed herself in her room, pressing her fingers to her still tingling lips. She barely knew this man, yet she felt more for him after 2 days than she had felt for anyone in her entire life. It was reckless and impulsive and completely unlike her usual careful nature, but she could not deny the truth blooming in her chest. She was falling in love with Aaron Ives. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Helena met with Judge Harrison twice more, providing detailed statements and helping him compile evidence against her uncle. She learned that Morris had indeed been making inquiries around town, searching for her, but so far he had found no trace. The judge had also issued a formal notice preventing Morris from accessing or disposing of any estate assets, which had apparently sent her uncle into a fury. "He is dangerous right now," Judge Harrison warned. "Cornered and desperate. You must be careful, Miss Daniels. Do not go anywhere alone, and if you see him, you alert the authorities immediately." Helena took his warnings to heart, staying close to Mary's boarding house and venturing out only when accompanied. Mary proved to be wonderful company, warm and talkative, and Helena found herself confiding details of her growing feelings for Aaron that she had barely admitted to herself. "My brother is a good man," Mary said as they folded laundry together in the kitchen. "He has been alone since Sarah died, throwing himself into work and never letting himself care about anything beyond the next job. But the way he looks at you, Helena, I have not seen that spark in his eyes in years." "It is too fast, is it not?" Helena asked worriedly. "I have known him less than a week." Sometimes the heart knows faster than the head, Mary replied with a knowing smile. My John proposed to me after 2 weeks, and we have been married 9 years now. When it is right, it is right. On the fourth day, when Aaron still had not returned, Helena began to worry. Mary assured her that ranch work was unpredictable, that he might have been delayed by weather or obligations, but anxiety gnawed at Helena's stomach. What if Morris had found him? What if her uncle had hurt him in retaliation for helping her? She was pacing the parlor at dusk when the front door opened and Aaron walked in, looking tired but whole. Relief flooded through her so intensely that her knees went weak, and before she could think better of it, she ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. He caught her with a surprised laugh, holding her tight against him, and for a long moment they simply clung to each other. I was worried, Helena said into his shoulder. You said 3 days. I am sorry. Tom needed help with a difficult calving, and then the snow made the road slow. I got here as fast as I could. He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. Did something happen? Are you all right? I am fine. Better now that you are here. They stood wrapped in each other's arms until Mary cleared her throat pointedly from the kitchen doorway. Aaron released Helena with a sheepish grin, but he kept hold of her hand as they moved into the parlor to talk. Over the next weeks, a pattern developed. Aaron would return to the ranch for a few days at a time to fulfill his obligations, then come back to Fort Worth to check on Helena and the progress of the legal proceedings. Each visit, the feelings between them intensified. They stole kisses in quiet corners, took chaperoned walks through town, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. Helena learned about his childhood dreams and his adult disappointments, his hopes for the future and his fears about never being enough. In turn, she shared her own vulnerabilities, her grief over her father, her anger at her uncle's betrayal, her determination to honor her father's wishes by building a life that meant something. Judge Harrison's case against Morris was building steadily. More evidence emerged of her uncle's financial improprieties, and witnesses came forward who had seen him meeting with unsavory characters. But Morris himself remained elusive, neither responding to legal summons nor appearing in town. His absence made Helena more nervous than his presence would have, like waiting for a storm she knew was coming, but could not see. One evening in early March, nearly 2 months after Helena's flight through the blizzard, Aaron arrived at the boarding house with a determined expression and a small box in his pocket. He asked Helena to take a walk with him, and though the request was unusual so close to dark, she agreed. Mary gave them a knowing look, but said nothing as they stepped out into the cool spring evening. Aaron led her to a small park at the edge of town, where early wildflowers were beginning to push through the last remnants of winter. They sat on a bench beneath a large oak tree, and Aaron took both her hands in his expression serious. Helena, I need to say something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond. Can you do that? Her heart began to pound. Of course. I know we have not known each other long. I know your life is complicated right now, full of legal troubles and danger. I know I am just a cowboy with more dreams than dollars, and you are a woman of means who could have any man she wants. He paused, his gray eyes intense on hers. But these past 2 months have been the best of my life. When I am with you, I feel like the man I always wanted to be. You make me want to build something permanent, something lasting. You make me want to be worthy of you. Aaron, Helena began, but he squeezed her hands gently. Let me finish. I love you, Helena Daniels. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you collapsed on my doorstep, frozen and terrified but still fighting. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love how smart you are, how you see through people's nonsense to the truth underneath. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, producing the small box. Opening it revealed a simple gold band with a modest sapphire, lovely in its unpretentious beauty. "I am not a rich man, and I cannot give you the kind of life you are accustomed to. But I can promise you honesty and loyalty and love that will never waver. I will work every day to make you happy, to build a life with you that is worth living. Helena, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Helena's face, but she was smiling through them, nodding before he had even finished speaking. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Aaron, of course I will marry you. I love you too. I have loved you since you sent my uncle riding off into nowhere to keep me safe. You are the best man I have ever known, and I do not care about money or status or any of that. I just want you." Aaron's face transformed with joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Helena felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. "When?" Aaron asked, resting his forehead against hers. "When can we get married?" "As soon as possible," Helena replied. "I do not want to wait. Life is too short and too uncertain. Let us marry and face whatever comes together." They returned to the boarding house to share their news, and Mary promptly burst into delighted tears, hugging them both fiercely. John shook Aaron's hand with genuine happiness, and even the children danced around excitedly, not entirely understanding what was happening but caught up in the joy nonetheless. Judge Harrison, when informed the next day, offered his congratulations along with a caution. "Your uncle will not take this well when he learns of it. A married woman has more legal protection than an unmarried one, and it will complicate his attempts to control your inheritance. Be prepared for him to act rashly." The warning proved prophetic. 3 days before the planned wedding, as Helena and Mary shopped for fabric for a simple wedding dress, a man approached them on the street. He was rough-looking, with cold eyes and a face that had seen too many bar fights, and he stepped directly into Helena's path. "Miss Daniels," he said, his voice low and threatening, "your uncle wants to see you. You are going to come with me quietly, or your friend here is going to get hurt." Helena's blood turned to ice, but before she could respond, Mary stepped forward with surprising courage. "You lay one hand on either of us and you will have the entire town sheriff's department down on your head," she said loudly, drawing the attention of passers-by. "This woman is under Judge Harrison's protection, and if you know what is good for you, you will leave now." The man hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance, and in that moment of uncertainty, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "I think you had better listen to the lady." Aaron stood 10 feet away, having apparently just arrived in town. His hand rested casually on the revolver at his hip, and his expression was calm but utterly implacable. The threatening man took one look at Aaron's face and apparently decided that whatever Morris was paying him was not worth a bullet. He backed away quickly, disappearing into the crowd. Aaron crossed to Helena in 3 long strides, pulling her against him. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine." Mary scared him off. Aaron turned to his sister with a look of profound respect. "Mary, you are braver than half the men I know." "I will not let thugs intimidate innocent women on the street," Mary said firmly, though Helena noticed her hands were shaking slightly. "But perhaps we should report this to the sheriff." They did exactly that, and Sheriff Patterson assured them he would look into the matter and increase patrols around the boarding house. But the incident had shaken Helena deeply. Morris was getting desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. "Maybe we should postpone the wedding," she said to Aaron that evening as they sat in the boarding house parlor, "until all of this is resolved, and we know you will not be in danger because of me." "Absolutely not," Aaron said firmly. "We are getting married in 3 days as planned." "I am not letting your uncle's threats control our lives, Helena. We move forward together and we do not let fear win." His conviction steadied her, and Helena nodded. He was right. They could not live their lives in fear of what Morris might do. They had to claim their happiness and face the consequences together. The wedding took place on a sunny March morning in a small church on the edge of Fort Worth. It was a simple ceremony, attended only by Mary and John, their children, Judge Harrison and his wife, and a handful of friends Aaron had made over his years in Texas. Helena wore a dress of pale blue that Mary had helped her sew, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers. Aaron wore his best suit, looking more handsome than any man had a right to, and when he saw Helena walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes filled with tears. The vows they spoke were traditional, but Helena meant every word with her entire heart. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Aaron kissed her, applause filled the small church, and Helena felt a joy so complete, it seemed impossible that anything could threaten it. The celebration afterward was held at the boarding house, with food and music and laughter filling the rooms. Helena danced with her new husband, with John, even with Judge Harrison, who proved surprisingly spry for his age. As the sun set and guests began to depart, Aaron drew her aside, his eyes sparkling with mischief and something warmer. "Mrs. Ives," he said, savoring the name, "are you ready to begin our wedding night?" Helena felt heat flood her cheeks, but she nodded, anticipation and nervousness warring within her. They climbed the stairs to the room that Mary had prepared for them, larger than Helena's usual chamber and decorated with care. Someone had left flowers on the dresser and fresh linens on the bed, and a fire crackled cheerfully in the small fireplace. Aaron closed the door behind them, and suddenly they were alone, truly alone, for the first time as husband and wife. He approached her slowly, giving her time to adjust, and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you," he said simply, "and I will spend every day of our lives together making sure you know it." Then he kissed her, and the world fell away. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a revelation of intimacy that left Helena feeling transformed. In Aaron's arms, she felt cherished and desired and completely safe, and when they finally fell asleep tangled together in the pre-dawn hours, she knew she had found her home. The days that followed were among the happiest of Helena's life, despite the shadow of Morris's threats still hanging over them. She and Aaron rented a small house on the outskirts of Fort Worth, a modest place but their own, and Helena threw herself into making it a home. Aaron found work at a nearby ranch, coming home each evening to his wife, and the simple domesticity of their life filled them both with contentment. Judge Harrison's case against Morris progressed steadily. In April, formal charges were filed, and a warrant was issued for Morris's arrest. The estate was officially secured in Helena's name, pending resolution of the criminal case, and for the first time in months, Helena felt as though she could breathe freely. Then Morris made his final, desperate move. It happened on a warm evening in May. Aaron had ridden into town to buy supplies, leaving Helena at home preparing dinner. She was humming to herself, thinking about the news she planned to share with Aaron that evening, news that would change their lives forever, when the front door burst open. Morris stood in the doorway, disheveled and wild-eyed, a pistol in his hand. "You ruined everything," he snarled, advancing on her. "Everything I built, all my plans destroyed because you could not just do what you were told." Helena backed away, her mind racing. "Uncle Morris, please. This does not have to end badly. Surrender to the sheriff, cooperate with the investigation, and perhaps they will show leniency." "Leniency?" Morris laughed bitterly. "They want to hang me, Helena, for fraud, for conspiracy, for attempted murder. There is no leniency for what I have done. But if I am going down, I am taking you with me." He raised the pistol, and time seemed to slow. Helena saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the barrel aimed at her chest, and knew she was out of time. In that frozen instant, she thought of Aaron, of the life growing inside her that he did not yet know about, of all the futures they would never have. Then the window shattered and a shot rang out. Morris jerked, the pistol firing wild, the bullet embedding itself in the wall 6 inches from Helena's head. Her uncle fell to his knees, blood blooming across his shoulder, and Sheriff Patterson burst through the front door with 2 deputies, weapons drawn. "Drop it, Daniels," the sheriff commanded, and Morris, groaning in pain, let the pistol clatter to the floor. As the deputies hauled Morris to his feet and dragged him away, Aaron appeared in the doorway, his own rifle still in his hands, his face white with terror. "Helena," he breathed, crossing to her in 2 strides and gathering her into his arms. "God, I saw him through the window, saw him aim at you. I have never been so scared in my life." Helena clung to him, shaking with reaction. "You saved me. If you had not come back when you did, if you had not shot first." "I know," Aaron said roughly, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I know, but you are safe now. It is over. He can never hurt you again." Sheriff Patterson approached, clearing his throat. "Mr. Ives, I will need a statement. That was a righteous shooting if I ever saw one, defense of your wife, but we have to follow procedure. And Mrs. Ives, are you injured?" "No," Helena managed. "I am fine, shaken but fine." "Well, your uncle will survive his wound, unfortunately for him. He will stand trial for what he did here tonight, plus all the other charges. With this, there is no question of conviction. He will spend the rest of his life in prison or more likely hang." The reality of it sank in slowly. It was truly over. Morris would never threaten her again. The inheritance was secured, her father's wishes honored, and she was free to build the life she wanted with the man she loved. In the days that followed, Helena and Aaron gave their statements to the authorities. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming, and Morris Daniels was sentenced to 20 years hard labor in the territorial prison. Judge Harrison finalized the estate settlement, officially transferring all assets to Helena, now Helena Ives, and congratulated her on her victory. "Your father would be proud," the judge said warmly. "You fought for what was right, and you won." A week after the trial concluded, Helena invited Aaron to sit with her on the porch of their little house as the sun set. She had been waiting for the right moment, and now, with everything finally resolved, the time felt right. "Aaron, I have something to tell you," she began, taking his hand in hers. He looked at her with immediate concern. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Everything is wonderful, actually." She smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I am going to have a baby, our baby. I am about 3 months along, I think." The expression that crossed Aaron's face was one of pure wonder. "A baby? We are going to have a baby?" "Yes," Helena confirmed, laughing as he whooped with joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "We are going to be parents," Aaron said, setting her down carefully and placing one hand over her still flat stomach. "You are going to be a mother. I am going to be a father. Helena, this is the best news I have ever received in my entire life." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about names and nurseries and all the ways their lives would change. Aaron was attentive to the point of being overprotective. insisting Helena rest more, eat more, do less around the house. It would have been suffocating if it had not been so clearly born of love. As summer arrived and Helena's pregnancy became visible, they made decisions about their future. With the inheritance now fully under her control, Helena had the means to help Aaron realize his dream of owning a ranch. They purchased land north of Fort Worth, 200 acres of good grazing ground with a creek running through it and a sturdy house that needed work but had good bones. Aaron threw himself into improving the property, hiring hands to help him repair fences and outbuildings, purchasing a small herd of cattle and several good horses. Helena, despite her growing belly, worked alongside him when he would let her, painting walls and planting a garden and turning the house into a true home. Mary and John visited often, bringing their children to run wild on the open land, and Judge Harrison stopped by occasionally to check on them, clearly pleased with how everything had turned out. Helena felt surrounded by community and love in a way she had never experienced, and she marveled at how far she had come from that terrified girl fleeing through a blizzard. In November, as the Texas winter began to settle in, Helena went into labor. Aaron paced the bedroom floor like a caged animal, while Mary and the midwife attended to Helena, refusing to leave despite Mary's insistence that he should go wait somewhere else. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, the midwife cleaned him off and placed him in Aaron's trembling arms. "A son," she announced. "You have a healthy baby boy." Aaron looked down at the tiny life in his arms, his face a study in awe and tenderness. "Helena," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Look at him. He is perfect." They named him Thomas Daniel Ives after Aaron's father and Helena's, and from the moment he entered their lives, he became the center of their world. Aaron proved to be a devoted father, rising for midnight feedings, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply watching his son sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. The ranch prospered over the following years. Word spread about the quality of the horses Aaron bred and trained, and buyers came from as far as Oklahoma and New Mexico. Helena managed the business side of things, her father's training in commerce serving her well, and together they built something substantial and lasting. 2 years after Thomas was born, Helena gave Aaron a daughter they named Sarah Mary, after Aaron's lost sister and his living one. Sarah had her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair, and she wrapped Aaron around her tiny finger from the moment she arrived. 3 years later came another son, William, who had Helena's determination and Aaron's easy smile. Life on the ranch was full of joy and occasional hardship, as all lives are. There were droughts that tested them and harsh winters that took their toll on the livestock. There were childhood illnesses that terrified them and accidents that required trips to the doctor in Fort Worth. But through it all, Aaron and Helena faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Aaron surprised Helena with a gift, a painting of the cabin where they had met, rendered in loving detail by an artist from Fort Worth. They hung it in their bedroom, a reminder of where their love story had begun, of the blizzard that had brought them together and the courage that had sustained them through everything that followed. "You ever regret it?" Aaron asked that evening as they lay in bed, his hand tracing idle patterns on her arm. Running away that day, everything that came after. Helena turned to look at him, this man who had saved her life and then filled it with more love than she had ever dreamed possible. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "That blizzard brought me to you. It gave me this life, these children, this love. I would run through 1,000 blizzards if it meant ending up here with you." Aaron kissed her softly, a kiss that still held the same passion and tenderness it had possessed on their wedding night. "I love you, Helena Ives. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." "And I love you," Helena replied, settling into his arms with the profound contentment of a woman who had found her home. Always and forever. As the years continued to pass, the ranch grew and their children flourished. Thomas proved to have his father's gift with horses, spending hours in the stables learning everything Aaron could teach him. Sarah was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and racing across the fields on whatever horse would tolerate her. William was the thoughtful one, more interested in books and numbers, helping his mother with the ranch accounts even as a young boy. Mary and John's children grew up alongside the Ives children, forming bonds that would last their entire lives. Judge Harrison, who had become something of a grandfather figure to them all, delighted in visiting the ranch and spoiling the children shamelessly. Even Sheriff Patterson stopped by occasionally, bringing candy and news from town. Morris Daniels died in prison when Thomas was 8 years old. Helena felt nothing at the news, no satisfaction or grief, only a distant sort of closure. That chapter of her life was long closed, the fear and anger transmuted over the years into something like pity for a man who had destroyed himself through greed. When Aaron turned 45, he looked out over the land they had built together and marveled at how blessed his life had been. 3 healthy children, a wife he loved more with each passing day, a thriving business, and respect in the community. It was more than he had ever dreamed possible during those lonely years working other men's ranches, and he never forgot that all of it had begun with a decision to help a desperate woman fleeing through a blizzard. Helena, for her part, never lost her gratitude for the man who had saved her. She made sure to tell Aaron regularly how much he meant to her, how his courage and kindness had given her everything worth having. She also made sure their children knew the story of how they met, teaching them that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the worst storms, and that true love is worth fighting for. As they grew older together, their love did not diminish but rather evolved into something richer and more complex. They knew each other's every flaw and loved each other anyway. They had weathered hardships and celebrated triumphs, raised children and built a legacy, and through it all, they had never forgotten the foundation of trust and devotion that held them together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their now adult children and a growing collection of grandchildren, Aaron stood to make a toast. His hair was silver now, and there were deep lines around his eyes, but his smile was the same one that had first captured Helena's heart. 25 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered family, a blizzard brought the love of my life to my door. She was running from danger, frozen and terrified, and I made a choice to help her. It was the easiest and best decision I have ever made. Helena, you have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. You have made me a better man, a father, a partner in every sense of the word. Every day with you has been a gift, and I look forward to spending whatever years we have left together, loving you more with each sunrise. Helena, tears streaming down her face, rose to embrace her husband as their family applauded. "And I will love you with every sunset," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you for saving me, Aaron. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for this beautiful life." They danced that evening, just as they had at their wedding, moving together with the ease of long practice. The children watched with smiles, and the grandchildren played at their feet, and the ranch stretched out around them under the vast Texas sky. It was a perfect moment, a culmination of 25 years of love and partnership, and Helena held tight to her husband, the cowboy who had hidden her from danger and given her everything in return. Years continued to pass in their gentle rhythm. The ranch eventually transitioned to Thomas, who had indeed inherited his father's skill with horses and expanded the operation even further. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son and started her own family nearby. William became a lawyer, following in Judge Harrison's footsteps, and practiced in Fort Worth while making frequent trips home to visit his parents. Aaron and Helena grew old together on the land they loved, spending their days in companionable peace. They took morning walks together, sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset, and fell asleep each night in each other's arms. Aaron's hair went completely white, and arthritis slowed his once quick hands, but he never stopped looking at Helena like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Helena's dark hair silvered gracefully, and time softened her features, but her eyes remained bright and her spirit undimmed. She still managed the household with quiet efficiency, still tended her garden every spring, and still loved her husband with the same fierce devotion she had felt as a young bride. They lived to see their children's children grow and marry and have babies of their own. They celebrated holidays surrounded by family, the house ringing with laughter and love. They marked milestones and mourned losses, but through everything, they had each other, and that made every burden lighter and every joy sweeter. When Aaron was 72, he took ill during a particularly harsh winter. The doctor from Fort Worth came and went with grave expressions, and the family gathered, fearing the worst. But Aaron rallied, determined not to leave his Helena before he was absolutely forced to, and by spring he was back on his feet, weaker than before but still smiling. "You cannot get rid of me that easily," he joked to Helena, who had barely left his side during the illness. "I have too much living left to do with you." They were granted 5 more years together, 5 precious years of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings, of a love that had weathered decades and only grown stronger. Then, on a cool autumn evening, Aaron passed away peacefully in his sleep, his hand clasped in Helena's, a slight smile on his face. Helena grieved, as she knew she would, but hers was not a bitter grief. She had been blessed with 52 years of marriage to the finest man she had ever known. She had built a life and a family with him, had loved him and been loved in return with a constancy that many people never experienced. She missed him terribly, the absence of him a constant ache, but she also celebrated the life they had shared and held tight to the memories that sustained her. She lived another 6 years after Aaron's death, surrounded by family who cherished her. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about the cowboy who had saved a young woman fleeing through a blizzard and had loved her every day after. She made sure they understood that true love was not just passion and romance, though those were important, but commitment and partnership, and choosing each other every single day. When Helena passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 77, her family buried her beside Aaron on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone was simple but meaningful, bearing both their names and a single line: "Through blizzards and sunshine, together always." The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's stewardship and later his children's, a living legacy to the love story that had begun with a desperate flight and a cowboy's choice to help a stranger. The painting of the little cabin hung in the main house for generations, a reminder to all who came after of where it all began, of how courage and compassion can transform lives and how love, once found, can echo through time itself. And so the story of Helena and Aaron lived on, passed down through the family like a precious heirloom. It was a story of survival and salvation, of justice and redemption, but most of all it was a story of love, the kind of love that weathers every storm and only grows stronger with time, the kind of love that, once kindled, never truly dies but lives on in the hearts and lives of all those it touched. The blizzard that had nearly claimed Helena's life had instead given her everything worth having. The cowboy who had hidden her and sent her uncle searching miles away had become her partner, her love, her entire world. And the life they built together, through hardship and joy, through struggle and triumph, stood as a testament to the enduring power of love to transform, to heal, and to create something beautiful and lasting from even the darkest of beginnings. Their story was complete, their journey ended, but the love they had shared continued on, living in their children and grandchildren, in the land they had tended, in the community they had served, and in the hearts of all who knew them. It was a legacy that would endure long after the last person who remembered them had passed. A reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unexpected ways, and that true love, once found, truly does last forever.